Hello and welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for listening. And a special thank you to all of you who support this podcast in various big and small ways, all of which are vitally important to making it possible. It's an honor and a joy to be part of this movement to redesign wine around ecological knowledge rather than continue a culture built solely on efficiency and productivity and often greed. Speaking of greed, one of my goals for 2025 is to evaluate all the ways I can make changes with my life to defund the oligarchy. I mentioned previously that we should all be card-carrying public library users, but also I've made the decision to stop engaging on Instagram by the end of February. So leaving Instagram, folks, I'd ask you to please instead engage with me through beyondorganicwine.com. There is an email sign-up form in the footer of the website. And once you're on the list, you'll receive only emails about Beyond Organic Wine. And I'll never sell or trade or give away your emails or do anything else like that. Emails are, strangely just like social media posts, except you kind of only get the ones you want unless you get spam, and they don't include trending audio clips. So, if you're mostly used to social media, it's not too far off. Try it out. Also, I continue to engage and build the Beyond Organic Wine YouTube channel. I hope to have some new videos coming soon. I will probably engage on other social media, TBD. I'm open to suggestions, and I'm looking at fan base as one of the most likely options at this point. More importantly, I invite you all to join me. Please consider how valuable your attention is, both to you and to others. And, that's why I'm so grateful for it. I want to share one important note. Maybe it's like 20 notes, but anyway, it's around one topic. A special note about some language choices that I'm making this year. I'm making a focused effort to eliminate several words from my vocabulary. The first two words I'm eliminating are nature and wild. If you listen to the first episode I released in 2025 titled The First Principle of Regenerative Viticulture, you'll have heard me explain my desire not to use the word nature or its derivatives, natural or unnatural. If you haven't listened, please do, but the oversimplified explanation is that the word nature has become meaningless to me, and that's because the ideas that we imply when we say that word are ideas of human separation from everything else, which is a lie. This leads to so many inaccurate ways of thinking and speaking, because we are inextricably part of that thing that we try to separate ourselves from with this word. I could say a lot about this, but the point is that by not allowing myself to use this word, I have to be thoughtful about what I actually mean when that word wants to slip into the way I'm expressing a thought. It has already been incredibly illuminating to do this. The word wild has very similar connotations, but even more explicit. When we say wild, we usually imply everything that we imply with nature, but with an emphasis not only on human separation from it, but our complete absence from it. The problem is that no place like this exists on Earth, or even for that matter, the space around Earth. The quote-unquote wilderness areas and wild spaces of the Earth are the results of multi-generational influences, both large and small, of human intentional and unintentional action. What we really mean when we use the word wild is something more like uncultivated in recent years, or neglected by humans since the last logging, or not tilled for long enough to reach third stage ecological succession, or spaces where undomesticated megafauna are allowed to live. There is no wild space on Earth, nor has there been for at least 10,000 years. Acknowledging this disillusions us from the fallacy that human influence is inherently bad. And it reminds us that we always influence the ecology of this world in every choice we make, whether it's how we act on a piece of rural land or what we consume in an urban neighborhood. And so we have deep ecological responsibility to be thoughtful about those choices and how they impact our home. By eliminating these words, I've been forced to evaluate some big ideas like natural wine, for example, or the rewilding movement, which many people revere, but which I've come to see as perpetuating ideas that alienate us from our community and our source. The other two words I'm eliminating from my thinking are weed, not weed as in marijuana, but the idea of weeds, as in unwanted or plants that are out of place, and the word pest. I've said a lot about those words already, and I say more in this episode, so I'll say less now. All of these words are deeply embedded in the way that we think about ourselves and our wine growing and winemaking choices, and I'm not going to stop every guest who uses them every time they do, but I'm already finding incredible value and insight in not letting myself say them. So please keep me honest and on my toes. What other words do you think we need to eliminate from our thinking? Now, it's a true pleasure to bring attention to the organization that my guest for this episode represents. Becky Sykes is the program director of the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, and she's gives us a great introduction to many of the resources and opportunities available to wine producers through the RVF's work. Becky tells us about the RVF's upcoming One Block Challenge, as well as their regenerative toolkit that you can participate in as a wine grower. And we discuss many of the other resources and ideas that the RVF brings attention to. In short, you will hear many reasons why and how you can get involved with the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation and help move viticulture in a regenerative direction. Enjoy! Hey, I wanted to mention at one point or multiple points throughout this conversation with Becky, we bring up certain questions that we say we wish we had data for regarding regenerative viticulture. Now, I want to reference you all back to an episode that I released back in April of 2024, 423. It's called Why Regenerative, and it features Dr. Jonathan Lundgren of Ecodicis. And his whole job is gathering data on regenerative agriculture. I'm also going to have an interview with one of the people that work with Dr. Jonathan Lundgren at Ecodicis or with Ecodicis, gathering regenerative data specifically for vineyards. So that's coming up in February. But go back if you want to listen to some of the data and some of the findings that we already have about regenerative agriculture generally. Listen to that episode from April of 2024 with Dr. Jonathan Lundgren of Ecodicis called Why Regenerative. Becky, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Becky Sykes, you are the program director for the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. And I got that right, correct?
Yes, absolutely perfect.
And I started this year by putting out something that I'd written for this podcast about how, we've kind of gotten regenerative viticulture or just regenerative agriculture in general wrong, that it's not about soil health, it's actually about community. And of course, community includes the community of the beings that inhabit our soil and all the beings that live from the soil, but it expands that idea from just soil to, all of us all the lives, human and non-human, who rely on each other. And then coincidentally, you reached out to me after that. And then the fun thing after that is I went back to the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation website and looked at your objectives. Your number one objective is to bring people together. And I just thought there was such serendipitous synergy going on here that it's really a pleasure to get you on to talk about the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. And I wonder if you can sort of talk about what the other objectives that you have besides bringing people together and what bringing people together means to you.
Yes, of course. Now, of course, this is a test for me to know what the other objectives are that are on our website, aren't they? But first of all, I do want to talk about community because I've been, I think, what are we, 3 weeks into the year, and this word community keeps coming up all the time, and I'm slightly overwhelmed by just how frequently it's coming up. And I've just been writing our January newsletter, and my introduction actually quotes you, and you're mentioning not about soil health, it's about community, because we're realizing, so we at the RVF have been going, I've been here almost 2 years. I'm the first employee. I think we've been officially around a bit longer than that while they raised some money to pay me, essentially. And in that time, really in these 2 years, I've really started to realize that the way we're going to really support people to make change is by building communities around them. And
Yeah.
no one can do this in isolation. And people don't like to learn from websites, PowerPoint presentations. They want to learn from their neighbours. They want to learn from people who are trialing the same things that they are in similar contexts with maybe similar soils,
Mm.
might not be identical, but then to learn from each other's mistakes as much as each other's successes, because I think that is the future of this movement very strongly. And what are the other things? Really, it's about, for us, it's making sure that we fully understand what the scientific evidence base is behind regenerative viticulture. And we've been doing lots of things around that, and communicating things like that, because most people don't want to read whole peer-reviewed primary literature studies that scientists have done. They're not that easy to digest. So communicating where the evidence actually exists, and communicating about things like events and things like that. So really we're about the science, the communication, and the support. That support is that community piece, I would say.
Right. Right. Education and awareness, as well as you have this one that I guess I want to ask a question about: create a support structure for people wanting to learn about
Yeah. Yes.
regenerative viticulture. What does
Uh,
that look like, or how do you envision that?
Well, it's come for the starting point for it is that often, especially in viticulture, but I guess all agriculture, people have, in some parts of the world in particular, they could be like the 14th, 15th generation of people growing that crop in that place, and they have this support structure around them for that their conventional methods that they've been using maybe up till now. You know, the agronomists and the advisors, the soil scientists, the people who come in and do their services for them. And when they start to get interested in regenerative practices, they don't quite know what to do. They may even have resistance from previous generations. They might have parents or grandparents saying, "No, that's not how we do it. We've always done like this." And they might have their agronomists or the soil scientists saying the same thing. So they do need often a new support structure. And for us, that's about finding neighbours near them. It's setting up peer to peer mentoring where we can. I mean, we're
Mm.
quite a small organisation. We're a very lean organisation, but we're trying to do this in the entire world's wine region. So it's quite a challenge. But the idea being that we want to form these communities where people can help each other. This year, last year we launched something called the RV Guide. And this was a guide to practices that we consider to be useful in farming grapes regenerative, and it covers about 16 different areas, and I'll tell you lots of detail about it. But the reason I think it's important for our community is that at the end people can choose to be on a map, and this map we're starting to build of regeneratively farmed, as much as they can be, vineyards, and people hoping that people will find each other through this map, that they can think, oh, we want to find someone near us who's maybe integrating animals into their vineyards, and then they can go and visit that person. So that's one side of it. But this year, and this is a bit hot off the press, Adam, we
Hmm.
are planning to do something we're calling a one block challenge. And the idea is that we bring together people in a region, or quite a small area really, who are interested in making some changes to their practices. We bring them together in a workshop. We help them form a community with maybe like a WhatsApp group, something like that, where they can ask each other questions. And then we're going to have this process where we ask, the idea, it's called a one block challenge, because the concept is that they take one block, which could be maybe their worst block, their least performing block, so that they've got the least to lose, maybe the most to gain. They take that block and then they do some really simple monitoring measurements on it themselves. Things like a penetrometer test to see basically how far you can push a stick into the ground. It's slightly more complex, but not much more complex. A water infiltration test, so to see how long it takes for a certain volume of water to go into the ground. And then maybe some more sophisticated soil tests. We're still working on the detail of some of this. And then the idea is that over the year, the growing season, they can visit each other, talk to each other, see how each other are doing in implementing some regenerative practices. And those practices could be reducing their tillage or going to no-till. It could be stopping herbicide use under vine. It could be bringing in compost. It could be cover crops. It depends on the region, really, what people want to do, and it could be a combination of them. And then at the end of that year, to do the same tests at roughly the same time of year, but in the same conditions, and then to see whether they've made a change. Now, it's a bit optimistic that we'll see a change in 1 year, but the idea is to start people looking differently at their vineyard and starting to think about different practices and starting to build this community around them. So that's the very kind of immediate community, but also kind of a global community with things like webinars, and we want people to feel they're part of this movement. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it seems like there's a potential risk there because I know a lot of trials of people who are transitioning from like just conventional to organic, for example, have a lot of times shown that the first 5 years can be difficult depending on a lot of factors, of course, but there can be transition lag basically where productivity decreases and health seems to lag because the vines are being resituated in their growth from reliant on us feeding them to feeding themselves essentially in really
Yeah.
general simplistic terms.
Yeah.
um and that can take some time for them to sort of relearn their instincts. And so I mean, do you have any concerns about that in this trial, or do,
Yes,
do
we
you have
do.
any?
Funnily enough, Adam, yes, we do. We do have concerns there. Of course, it
Because
transitioning. Yeah. Sorry, carry
I
on.
mean, I just would, it's like one of those things when you're trying to promote regenerative viticulture, and then the results from 9 out of 10 people who do the 1 block challenge are negative or something like that. And then you have like you have to do. I mean, it seems like it would be smart to have the expectations be that and then let people be surprised versus if it
Yes.
turns out better, that kind of thing.
What you're saying is very valid. We are concerned, of course, but that's why we're sort of saying to people that to take this one block and possibly your worst block, so that that block isn't the one that's performing the best anyway. So they're not
Got it.
betting the farm on this block. And the idea is that we're not kind of suggesting anyone goes cold turkey or and changes all their practices overnight on the whole farm, but that's why it's really to kind of get 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 people just to kind of consider doing slightly different things and to see what the outcomes are without there being a massive financial investment in that. But you're right. I'm not sure we should tell them that it's going to fail, because I think the hope is that they will see some really fabulous results in the first year. It might not be about yield. It might be about something different. It might
Right.
be about quality. It might be something different. It might be something more that's more about how they see their grapes and their vines at the end of that year. We don't yet know, but we do know that it does take many years often to build up to this process. Yes, it
Yeah.
could be a multi-year trial.
Right.
You can't do things quickly, can you? That's the thing. But it shouldn't stop
No.
them trying to do it at all, is what we've
Right.
decided.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just going back to, I mean, I'm going to ask you a few other questions just related to that, but I guess maybe the way I should start is, you've been, like you said, you were the first hire, so to speak. Um, what have you seen I mean, this is we're learning so much as regenerative agriculture and viticulture are getting out into the world and more people are trying it, like so many, like we're on a rapidly in scaled learning scale. And so I'm just curious what you've seen in terms of change, what you're excited about, just sort of like your historical perspective over the last couple of years.
I think for me, it does feel like it's accelerating really fast. Sometimes I wonder whether that's me in my echo chamber and I'm listening to people talk about regenerative viticulture because that's what I'm thinking about all the time. I'm slightly obsessed with it, I have to say. What's wonderful is to continuously hear from people who are trialing more and more things and to hear about people increasing their soil organic matter and to hear about people with their cover crop trials. So I think it's been a steep learning curve for me to catch up with all the different things that are going on around the world. And also, there are some pockets of the world where, well, I don't know everything that's going on, clearly. I can't possibly, but there's all sorts of exciting things going on in places like France, where it's taken me a while to work out what they're doing, and they don't necessarily call it regenerative viticulture. They might call it agroecology. And I think the most exciting stuff is, like, for today, for example, I spoke to some people in Australia at Inkwell Wines, and they were telling me about how they had quadrupled their soil organic matter in 2 years, and that was quite exciting. The things
Wow.
that I've found that I wasn't expecting to spend so much time considering are certification schemes, which seem to be blossoming. I mean, they seem to
Yeah.
be growing crazily, just how many there are. And I get quite a lot of inquiries from people trying to work out what the difference is between them all. So I'm currently updating our information on that, and there are now so many that have certified vineyards. Our position is that we don't feel people should feel that they need to certify, but if they want to give some veracity to what they're doing, to someone else, maybe it's a retailer or an importer, then we want to be able to give them the information that tells them what the difference is between them all. I
Can
think,
you
yeah.
give a can you give a little rundown? I know you guys have one there in at least one there in the UK, and we have like probably two here in the US that I'm aware of
Well, what's
that are
interesting is they're all kind of global, weirdly, I
yeah.
think. So the main difference is, oh, I can get very boring very quickly on certification. Do stop me if I do get boring. So it seems, so the initial difference, so there is one that's officially for viticulture only, and that is based in Spain and was been set up by several organizations, but the main one being the Torres family. They you don't have to be organic at the beginning of the process, but you're organic by the time transitioned at the end of the process. And they verify or certify the wine that comes out of the winery rather than the vineyard itself.
Oh, that's
And
interesting. Okay.
they're quite new. They've done, I think, 7 wines they did in 2024. That was the first year they certified any wines.
And does that mean
Um,
that they have standards for the wine making that you have to meet?
Pass, actually, because I only know about the viticulture. This is where you find I have a big gap in my
Fair.
knowledge. I'm definitely about the viticulture and not about the winemaking. It's
Great,
probably
great.
and then the biggest one in terms of numbers of wine producers who have been certified is the ROA's Regenerative Organic Certification, and
Right.
clearly that has been that requires organic certification first before you start. And that, yes, I think they've done about 30 vineyards,
Yeah.
and they have quite strong like social aspects. So workers' pay and things like that, they're quite strong on. And
Yeah.
also they're strong on the animal husbandry side of it.
Yeah.
And then there's, oh yeah, I could go on. There's certified regenerative from a greener world.
That's
They
the one
did,
I was thinking of that
yeah,
you guys
but
that's based there, yeah.
yeah, they did. Their first one was in France. They did the first
Oh, okay.
French certified regenerative vineyard, Chateau de Nage, and yeah, they're lovely. They very much about setting very specific farm milestones with the
Gotcha.
farmers. They're farmers.
Right.
All these ones are non-profits, by the way. And
Yeah.
then there's Regenified, which is the one that Gabe Brown set up. And
Now that
then
one is a little different in that you I don't know, maybe it's the only one, but it's definitely the one that stands out of the big ones that allows non-organic usage. Like even herbicide is allowed to be used in
yes, yes.
some
I've
of the
just been
vineyards.
reading their standards because that's how my fun day is, reading the standards of a certification
I know,
scheme.
I
And
totally
it
agree
does
with you.
say It does say something like the use of pesticides, and that includes herbicides, must be in a plan that's been pre-approved by the board. So I don't think it's just you can just carry on. I mean, I'm not
Right.
entirely sure, and but I think it has to be pre-approved. Whether that's difficult or not difficult to get that pre-approval, I don't know.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Yes, so that is the big difference between the ones that have organic as a prerequisite and the ones that don't have organic as a prerequisite. And this is a conversation we have quite a lot at the foundation, because organic, we think maybe you know actually, Mr. Organic Wine Podcast, we think that the percentage of um, wines that are grown, and is it the grape or the wines? Anyway, I'm not quite sure. It's about 6% of vineyards, we think, by area. I think that's right, that are organic. You
It
might have a
globally.
globally. I think you might have a different figure.
Yeah, that's
I
probably
don't know.
about right. I mean, it's probably about right. It's definitely higher in Europe and way lower in the U.S. So that average probably comes out, and then you have Australia. Everywhere else is, I think,
Yeah.
more like the U.S. where it's lower than. I mean, I think
Some
Europe.
regions in France are running at like a quarter, which is amazing. Like Bordeaux,
Yeah,
weirdly,
yeah.
which with its dampness and humidity and disease manages 25%, I think, and Provence as well, I think. I might be wrong on these numbers. I shouldn't say them out loud on a podcast, should I? But I think,
No,
sorry.
but no,
Yeah,
no.
so
I mean, it's true. I mean, what's interesting about Bordeaux is it's also one of the places with the highest pesticide use. So they're kind of like,
that's
you
because
know,
they're so damp.
yeah, exactly. So it's that's one of the. I mean, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but yeah, it is. I mean, I'll stop. I'll just stop
There's a
there.
lot of
Yeah.
copper there. If you look at a copper
Yes.
map of
Yeah.
France, you end up looking at a lot of wine regions, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but interestingly, these lovely people I was speaking to today, you're going to have a lot of facts from these lovely people in Australia from today, because that's who I've last spoke to, who was a grower. They were talking about having cover crops as stopping downy mildew from. I know you don't have a problem with downy mildew where you are, but downy mildew, the inoculum, it splashes up from bare soil when you get rain. And they were
Right.
saying that if you have a cover crop, you instantly halve your downy mildew something pressure. So that was quite,
Oh, that
yeah.
is great
I,
data.
they've got great data, actually, I have to say.
Yeah.
But the reason I was
I'm,
talking about that was because the foundation, what we think is that there's about 6%, give or take, are organic around the world. If we
yeah.
limit regenerative practices and our focus on regenerative practices to that 6% who are already organic, then we are really limiting our reach and the ability to regenerate vineyard soil. So we are very keen to work with all growers wherever they are, whether they're organic, biodynamic, on under some sustainability scheme, or very conventional. And sometimes we also have this, that mantra, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, that we want. Sometimes would it be better to get a really kind of large scale producer who's quite conventional to move their needle only a small amount, or is it better to get this boutique small vineyard to go kind of to this kind of perfect image of what regenerative is? These are
Hmm.
the existential crises we have at the RVF.
I mean, it's true. I mean, this is definitely things that I think about as well. But I definitely, as militant as I am in the sense of like what I would do and where I am and what the science that I know is out there, and that's kind of
Yeah,
undeniable at this point about what is a better way to do this and the harm that we're doing with the wrong way of doing this. I know that everybody's like on a path, and like I had a lot to learn, a few years ago, and
yeah,
wasn't anywhere close to where I am now. Even though had started down that path, I wasn't even thinking about half the stuff that I'm thinking about now. So it's yeah, like it definitely is. I think really important to meet people where they are, knowing that we all are somewhere on that path, and we're at different
yeah.
paces based on so many different factors of our lives and our businesses. Um, that
Yeah, and I
it's
also know that I don't have skin in the game, as people like to say. I don't.
yeah,
I'm not trying to bring in a crop,
right.
and I put my hands up, and I admit that very freely. I've worked in vineyards. I've got a master's in viticulture, but I'm not currently trying to bring in a crop and relying on the money from that. So, part of this regen thing is we need to try and work out the economic case behind it, and see, over that long transition that we talked about earlier, that it could be, there could be a dip and it could come up. And we've got some anecdotal data, but we don't have a lot of hard data. And I think that's one of the kind of things we're going to be looking at this year, is to try and get there are individual aspects, like people talk about kind of how much they spend now that they're not tilling, as opposed to bringing sheep in. And again, that varies in different parts of the world. So for
Right.
example, I know that having sheep, if you pay for sheep services, well, you have to pay for sheep services in some parts of the world, I think in California, whereas in the UK it's more of a mutual agreement.
Right.
So if you want sheep to be brought onto your land, the shepherd gets some winter grazing in our very soggy landscape, and in return you get some mowing done of your grass. But then in somewhere like South Africa, they're trialing a program with the University at Stellenbosch, where the farmer grows the cover crops. When the cover crops reach a certain height, the cows, because they graze cows rather than sheep often, or I say often, but this trial is with cows, and they are going to weigh the cows before they go into the vineyard, before they graze the crop. Then they graze the crop, and then they get weighed again at the end, and the farmer gets paid. So the wine grape grower gets paid on the basis of how much weight the cows put on whilst in the
Yeah.
vine.
Yeah,
So
that's clever.
everything's different around the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I sometimes feel that I'll never know everything that's going on, even though I live and breathe this 24/7. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, and well, speaking to that, I mean, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and since we were talking about certification, yeah, there's this great quote I read recently that there isn't soil. We talk about soil and all the time with regenerative viticulture, but there
Mm,
isn't soil. There's thousands of soils,
yeah,
and there and how do you define a certification specifically, but how do you define even the concept given these things, not just like the soil types and structures and biology, but the things that live in and around the soil, the kind of lives that those soils support in those climates, different flora, different fauna, macro and micro. And yeah, it becomes a real, I mean, that was a big element of my last year, was just seeing
yeah.
seeing all the unknowns, seeing the ways in which the some of the things that we have already gotten dogmatic about, we might need to just step back from that dogma a little
Well,
bit
yeah,
and
because
and
then also,
ask, like, hey, wait, what is the best for this specific site?
yeah. Also, you bring in vintage variation into that,
Right.
and even if you think that you've understood the context, this one specific context, or each of your parcel specific contexts, you then find the next year you have completely different climatic conditions, and you have no idea what's going on. There's some interesting work in New Zealand. There's an organisation, a research institute there called the Brigato Research Institute, and a guy there called Seth is doing a decision support tool for soil management for New Zealand vineyards, based on he's mapping all the different variations in soil in the Marlborough region. That's their biggest region, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
So every kind of micro variation, because what he says is, if you look at what your neighbour's doing and you think, oh, well, I might try that, that seems to work for them, he thinks that actually that's still too big a risk, because they might have very different soil types.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I think that's too big a question, Adam, and I can't answer it because there's too many elements involved in what you just said. An interesting thing in the UK is um, these guys have mapped the sound of the bugs in the soil. So they recorded the sounds of protozoa and tardigrades and worms and everything in the soil, in different soil types, and they've mapped what they the sound that they make in different. well, they've mapped the UK vineyard soil regions or region soils with all these different sounds. And I think they've done the same in Champagne. And the idea is that they know what these bugs sound like, these microbes sound like. So then they've got these soil probes, and you put the soil probe into your vineyard soil, it records the sound and it gives you a proxy for soil health because it can tell you how many of each type of these microbes are in the soil. Because
Huh.
digging pits and sending off soil samples is laborious and expensive. And so they're trying to come up with a way to kind of sidestep that by having these soil probes. I mean, I love it. Who came up with this idea? Oh, I wonder what this sounds like. I mean, I listened to it. We have this festival in the UK, a Regen Ag festival called Groundswell, and
Oh
they
yeah.
were there this year. And we went along and listened. We're standing in a tent listening to a recording of a protozoa in a clay soil, and I thought, wow, I've really made it in life. Better get a beer. Yeah, so
That's amazing.
it is amazing. Now they're doing some Kickstarter campaign, so you can give your money and you can get approved. But it doesn't work in the US yet. Maybe someone else will do it in the US, or maybe they'll expand. But it's quite a nice idea, I think.
Do you think, are there
And
clips?
yeah,
Do you think I could get a clip of a protozoa in a clay soil that I could splice into this audio for people? That would be
I'll
amazing.
send you their details and we'll see what we can get. That would be really
Okay. All
cool.
right. Hey, I couldn't get an audio clip, so I could insert some fun soil sounds here for you to listen to. But I did find a white paper about this and a fun video that talks about what is being done with this and how it can actually be beneficial. It's kind of a cute, fun video that simplifies things, but actually introduces some really cool ideas. So those will be linked in the show notes.
So yeah, I mean, there's fascinating things, aren't there? And actually, but that's one of the things I really love about Regen is that this it's a lot of it we feel like is best practice from the good old days, but overlaid with this really high tech, ever evolving kind of techniques that people are coming up with. If it's, I know the drones and things like that, but also precision things, and then things like these soil acoustics. They call it bioacoustics,
Yeah.
ecoacoustics.
Okay.
And they have above ground ones as well, so you
Yeah.
can hear, record that. But that's a bit more straightforward and logical. But this below ground. But I also like, sorry, I've really gone off on one. The idea of plants being bioindicators. So
Absolutely.
having
Yeah.
guides to different regions, and if you've got these weeds, or we don't like to call them weeds anymore, do we? These
No.
voluntary plants. I don't know, these plants growing. I don't think we've got a good replacement name for weeds yet, but if you've got these certain plants growing, what does that mean? What's in your
Messenger
soil?
plants, I call them.
Mm. What do you call them?
Messenger plants.
Messenger plant. Oh, that's nice. Yes, I would like that. Oh, I'm gonna have to write that down. Yeah, yeah. So
the, the yeah, I mean, I see that. It's really, I mean, simple, silly example, but it's just, now that I've started observing and have, studied quite a bit of this in deeper ways, I bring that knowledge back to my little Los Angeles, patch of soil here, and I have started noticing how the dandelions bloom and grow, or like they root and grow, even though their seeds are literally everywhere. They are growing right at the edges along the cement, and it's, they're
mm,
sort of, this is, it just becomes really clear that there's something going on right at that edge
mm,
where, calcium and all the, the pH and everything is being affected by the cement coming in
yeah.
contact with the soil there, and that is where these plants take root to start to change that, to start to, take advantage of that niche and then alter it and change it into something else. You can imagine us stepping away where we're not maintaining that sidewalk for 1,000 years. Those dandelions would be the first line of turning that sidewalk back into soil, and it's really, it's just really
Wow.
interesting
Wow. That's
to,
amazing, isn't it? And it's not
yeah, it's just
because you hadn't noticed the dandelions were there and hadn't weeded them.
right, right. And that's the thing. I don't, I don't now. Like, even if there's something that's just like taking over a specific spot, like, I might let it, because I feel like maybe it's just progression in a succession. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's that's the stage of succession it's in right now, and so it
Yeah.
needs that to happen there. Or I'll be like, well, clearly, you know, I'm starting to recognize the signals where I see like, oh, it, you know, there's bare dirt here, and that needs that's not happy, you know, that it doesn't want to be bare. And so if this thing is growing there, I don't want it there. I'll try to seed in other things that are really vigorous that I do want, like mint or something like that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
um and
Yeah.
then that might, you
Oh,
know,
I've just
that might
remembered something.
change
Yeah.
things, and who knows. Yeah.
So my brain has gone off on one. I've just you asked me earlier about kind of anything that I didn't expect that kind of I've seen a lot of. Something that I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And it's this water thing. So I became very obsessed with soil, obviously, because you can't work in region and not be obsessed with soil. What I hadn't realised was how obsessed I'd become with water, and I seem to be
Oh yeah.
going off on a lot of very kind of tangential journeys looking into water cycles, and have come across some really interesting people who are working in this area of the whole water cycle thing. And I know that I think maybe you've talked to Mimi about it before, I don't know. But just how fascinating and how, especially with the recent fires, this cycle of drought and then fire and then flood. And
Yeah.
we've seen that very much with our chairman, Stephen Cronk. He's got this domain, this vineyard in France called Mirabeau, and they had dry conditions, and then the forest around them caught fire. And a couple of years ago, and then just recently, they had this extreme precipitation event, and just all this, because there was nothing holding the soil together in what had been the woodland, all these
Yeah.
branches and everything just got kind of flooded onto the vines. I mean, it was really quite horrific to see.
Yeah.
And especially after all his years of having kind of been doing these regenerative practices, trying to rebuild his soil organic matter and get everything kind of, as good as he can, it felt like it was just it was a real blow, a real blow. So I think it
Yeah.
will hopefully rebound more rapidly because of the work that he's put in over the last few years to rebuild the soil health in the vineyard. And of course, his vineyard floor was all covered with cover crops, other plants, messenger plants, as I know.
Yeah.
So yes, things could have been worse, of course, but it's these cycles. And then in France, there's these people doing quite a lot of work on what they call regenerative hydrology. And in
Yeah.
vineyards, they are doing a lot of work like reorienting the rows, so they're not going down the slopes, but instead they are kind of hugging
On
the
contour.
contours.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. I mean, it raises challenges for trellising, because so much trellising is done in very straight lines, isn't it?
Yeah.
um, and yes, but built like digging out basins to capture the water, and then so it's available for when they need it when there's a drought. It's all really fascinating, and I didn't think I'd spend so much time thinking about water.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I found too. Like the, you know, you can only go so far into regenerative anything before you're into agroforestry and beavers, you know, and and tree,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you know, and then if you can't get the beavers, then you need humans to take their place to, you know, to do the work that beavers have historically done for the landscape, in some
yeah,
form, you know, to that fits into our current, you know, property ownership models that aren't as expansive as a beaver's territories, for example, and impact. But yeah, it's really, it's, you know, it's funny, you know, I think John Muir has a quote like, if you know, you try to pull one thread and you realize, you know, pull one messenger plant out of your yard and you realize it's connected to the whole universe, kind of thing. That
yeah.
idea that, you know, you just can't.
Yeah, it is quite crazy, and it's quite difficult to get your head around it all sometimes, because where do you stop in your efforts to, make a change? Or for me, communicate to other people. And maybe not everyone's ready to start talking as much about water as I am. So I'm trying to rein myself up, excuse the quote, rein myself in a little bit, the pun. Yes.
Well, no, I mean, I mean, you know, I think it's like, I mean, that's the other thing. When you start thinking about regenerative, you look, like you just said, like you start looking at the actual ways that our agricultural and vineyard systems have been designed around productivity and efficiency rather than ecology. And so then, you know, you have to step back even further and start thinking about design and redesign. and building with these ideas in mind of like, how do you think about water rather than
Yeah.
mechanization when you plant a row or plant vines, because maybe you won't use a row if you start thinking ecologically, or maybe you'll use a different orientation to the row. It won't be related to the
Yeah.
sun, it'll be related to the contours. um
It's
yeah,
tricky though, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
people got
there's
so
a lot
used
of
to
things
the
to balance.
machinery and the
Yeah.
equipment they've got, and it's expensive to change all these things. But it would be fun to be designing a vineyard from scratch on completely kind of ecological lines, I think. I went to the Douro Valley in Portugal in
Yeah,
December, and
yeah.
looking at these kind of precipitous slopes and how they farmed those, and they had kind of horse-drawn plows tilling along the rows, with tiny narrow rows, and it just gets sets you off thinking with your regen head. It's like, well, should they be mowing? Should they be, do we want to try and stop tillage? What else could they use? Well, they could use herbicide, but that wouldn't be good. And then you're trying to come up with a solution. Before you know it, you're thinking there isn't a good solution. This is all a nightmare. Look at this slope. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. There's like terraforming. I mean, that was kind of when I first time I went to Sicily, I was kind of had this realization that like people had been living there much longer than in a concentrated area, and because I was just like, every hillside and mountainside is terraced. Like, there
Yeah,
isn't a unlandscaped portion of that island almost. I mean, that's not true, but there's so much of it. There's so many areas are literally, you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's terraces on the mountain sides, and
amazing,
it's
isn't
like,
it?
clearly people have been thinking about this and doing this, before, like, we could just do mining for water and irrigation of that type. People have been thinking about this for thousands of years, and terraforming the world to make it possible to grow these things in dry climates like Sicily, drier, hotter climates like that. And it, yeah, so you know
Yeah, and they would have
interesting.
been working with animals, wouldn't they? So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And a
It
lot
is
more people too, probably, in the low. I mean, those places where it's like out in the middle of nowhere probably had bigger populations,
yeah. Well,
a
you're
while
right.
ago.
This is a problem that they're facing in a lot of places, isn't it? That the workforce is not available. I don't know
Yeah,
what it's like in the States, but in Europe, you've got whole generations of farmers are about to retire, leaving no one to take over those farms and those vineyards, let alone
and this
people to work in them now.
and this is a question for you. I mean, it seems to me, I, I mean, it seems to me that, do you find that regenerative costs more or costs less? Like, do you have any data on that? Are you finding
Well, we
farms are using a lot more labor and other inputs, now that they've removed tillage and sprays and stuff like that?
This is what we're going to work on this year, is to find out what the actual answer to that is, because farmers really want to know, and I think
Yeah.
this is the bottom line. This is what they need to know. The only data we've got recently is from one of our trustees, Kane, and down at Paso Robles,
Right.
at Robert Hall Winery, and he did a 3-year side-by-side transition. I think you went to see him recently, didn't you?
I did.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
And
so
I'm
he.
going to do a whole episode with Kane pretty soon.
Oh,
Yeah. Next
excellent. Oh,
month.
well, I won't. You can keep your powder
Oh, go
dry.
ahead. You can tease it.
Um, so, what he has found over his 3 years was, I think, compare. In fact, you will need him on because I can't quite remember the data. It works out roughly the same, but I
Okay.
think what happened was, I think the some years, because he had a side by side comparison of control and the ones
Yeah.
that he was transitioning to regen. And I think so. Some years there was a slight difference in costs, and some years there was a slight difference in yield. But effectively, essentially, at the end, it worked out roughly the same. But he has some interesting data on his quality of wine. That he feels that the wine quality is improved with regenerative viticulture practice, and that's something that we're obviously quite excited by the idea of. We've heard anecdotal reports that people testing their kind of regeneratively farmed uh, parcels, but the ones that are more that they haven't yet tried to use these practices on, and that the regen ones are coming out in blind tastings to be the ones that are preferred. But I was
Yeah.
asked this of in Bordeaux, Chateau Palmer in Bordeaux, and I very excitedly said to this wonderful man there, so the regenerative they've been implementing a lot of regenerative practices there. They're really cool. And so some of these Bordeaux growers, they're in these very expensive appellations where the land is phenomenally expensive, and they're taking out rows of vines to replace them with things like market gardens and things like that to increase the diversity of their crops to kind of reduce the monoculture. And they're very committed to it. But I said to this guy, so is the wine better? He said no. And I was absolutely devastated. I was like, oh no, that's terrible. I'll get my coat, shall I? And he said, no, 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 no. You see, the thing is, the wine is exactly the same as it was before. And I think to him, this was a point of principle that he thought his wines were perfection before he started. Well, not perfection, but he thought they were fabulous before, and they were still fabulous using these
Got
different
it. Got it.
techniques. So it was a slightly different lens to my lens, but actually, I was very happy when I walked away because at first I thought that the wines had somehow been not as good once they were regeneratively farmed. Yeah. So
Yeah.
finances is one we do need to really look into.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, that's really interesting. We could go down a whole
I do
rabbit
know
hole for
that on the Napa Green website they've got some data from Gurgich Hills. I can't say that very well, I'm afraid. Um,
yes. And I
Ivo,
think
yeah.
well, and that's what not to spoil anything, but what Kane has found at Robert Hall is they in the first like it's now 4 years I think of comparative data that they
Mm,
have, but on average now out from those 4 years, uh, the productivity is greater in the regeneratively farmed block. So they have, and just I think I mean, just to tease this a little bit more, it's as far as I know, the largest side by side comparison in the world of conventional, compared to
yeah,
regenerative, two identical 5 acre blocks that literally are adjacent to each other side by side.
yeah,
I think they've switched the whole estate to regenerative organic certification, but
yeah,
they've kept one 5 acre conventional block because it's identical to its next door block, that they can farm the same and harvest at the same time. Um, there are some really interesting comparisons there that people have to tune in, because I think that is the case as well. Like I think there are flavor differences, and it's but there are some things to be said about why that is. So like, but I won't go into it here because there are there's some really there's some unknowns, and then there's some really interesting things, and I think it's really eye opening, and also like I want to also be
exciting
realistic
though.
about it. Yeah, it
It's
is
really
really exciting.
exciting. And Kane is amazing. And, it's not
Yeah.
just the vineyards that he's converted. He's converted himself. He's like, he
Yeah.
is, he's now a trustee. He's our newest trustee. And
Yeah.
it's really good to have a trustee who's converting or transitioning the vineyards at scale. And he's so enthusiastic and gives up a lot of his time. So, I mean, it's really good. And to the point at which we're going to be trialing the one block challenge at his place to start with local growers to him. So that is quite exciting.
Yeah, that is great.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
and I, I don't want to keep us too long talking about these ideas, although I could talk about them all day. But I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about the RVF, and because I really like what you're doing. Obviously, I mean maybe not obviously, but I do really like
thanks.
what you're doing, and and part of that is just that your website has become like a nexus for incredible resources for anybody, for so many different levels of information. Like I think you have a toolkit page, which if people are interested in like literally any of these topics that we're talking about, you guys have put together individual pages, whether it's animal integration, fungal control, weed control. Shame on you
Mm.
for using the word weed. Just kidding.
Yeah. I think
Biodiversity,
messenger plant control works quite as well.
certification, monitoring soil health, undervine management, soil organic matter, water use, insect control, ecosystem design, and agroforestry. One of my, things that's near and dear to my heart, your agroforestry page. And this is why I feel like I can speak to many of these things. Like the resources on that agroforestry page it's a bibliography for some of the best resources everywhere. It
Oh,
connects you
I'm
to,
obsessed with it.
yeah, there's so much great stuff and so many examples. One of which, I just read the Chateau Cheval Blanc manifesto that you also linked to from your
Isn't it
site, which is
amazing?
great.
It's
Yeah,
beautiful. I've got a
yeah.
physical copy of it that they gave me. It's like one of my most treasured possessions.
So great. And it's great to see, one of these like sort of revered old like chateaus in Bordeaux really going for it with this, really integrating trees, like doing integrating hedgerows, pulling out, putting, literally doing things that are not necessarily short term, at least
Mm,
economically profitable,
yeah,
but they,
absolutely.
they have, I mean, in some ways they have the advantage of being this, long storied estate that has massive financial backing. They can afford to, take these risks or take these,
Yeah.
take a longer view. They can take a 50, 100 year view of,
I love that they see it as their duty, though. That's
yeah,
the thing.
yeah,
They feel it's their duty, and that there isn't time to wait. There
yeah,
isn't time to wait and for some university to decide whether a 10-year study into agroforestry makes any difference, or makes things worse, or makes things better, and then start to grow those trees. They want to be the ones doing it now, so that if they start to see some results, then they can bring the researchers in to start doing the study. But they've already got lots of data. They're amazing, I have to
that's,
say.
yeah, that's great.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we agroforestry is one of those things that is something that I think if you get into regenerative viticulture, you get more and more interested in, because this idea of the whole, all these mycorrhizal fungi, and can the roots of the forest trees talk to the roots of the vine trees, and the vines evolve to grow up trees, and there's a lot of questions, and we don't know what all the answers are, but you start to get obsessed with it. And I've had to rein myself in, I think, a little bit on the agroforestry front, because on those pages on the website, you'll notice that there probably is slightly more on agroforestry than anything else, because I've realised that
Yeah,
actually that's not the starting point for most people. And most
yeah,
people,
yeah,
the starting point is starting to monitor their soil health, starting to look at their vine fertility from a kind of more kind of bringing in compost and things like that, and using cover crops rather in to try and reduce the synthetic fertilizer. And we've just done these two webinars, both on agroforestry, with the delightful Porto protocol. And
yes.
I think I need to stop talking about agroforestry for a little bit, because I think we need to be relevant to everybody at the moment. But I am really fascinated by it. Yeah. Well, of course, you interviewed Paul Rolt from Hebron in Wales, didn't you,
Yeah, Paul
recently?
and Gemma. Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean,
that
he is the extreme of agroforestry.
it's really a beautiful thing too. I went out to visit them too, actually. And it all started because I honestly was. This is the kind of nerd I am in these things. I would literally just did a search for regenerative viticulture on like my podcast app, and then
Yeah.
just started listening to various things just to hear what other people are saying, and just whatever, like to like,
Mm.
this is, like I said, I'm nerdy about it. So, and you were being interviewed by, I forget the podcast now, but you probably could know it. You went on 3 times with this
Oh,
guy,
yes, that's the UK wine show, which,
the We UK Wine Show. Yeah, not
yeah,
regenerative focused at all, but they gave you
no,
some great coverage, and you it made an offhand mention about them because they got regenerative certified from the Greener World
yes,
certification.
yes,
And I
first
was
one to
like,
the
oh, I didn't,
UK.
and then I looked into them, and I was, and then I ended up going to visit them. It was then where
Yeah,
they are is like this beautiful, beautiful hillside place, and it's like what you see, what I mean more clearly when you start thinking about this is like when you start thinking about when you start thinking regeneratively, when you start trying to build like you're trying to, let's just say you want to grow grapes more ecologically, you quickly realize like you have to build an entire system. Like it isn't like
yeah,
you can just do one thing. There's like everything is it becomes interconnected on your farm. And like he's got
Yeah.
these little willow groves where he's growing, like a coppice grove where he's got a
Mm.
couple acres of willow trees that he coppices, and he uses for all kinds of things, including they become the structure for the vineyard. They
Yeah,
become
amazing.
and so they become this living trellis system in his vineyard. The really really interesting thing is, side by side, he has one block that he planted at exactly the same time, same grape cultivars on the same hillside, one with wire and post normal trellising and one on the living willow trellises.
Mm.
And there's nothing scientific about this other than that they were planted at the same time, same variety, side by side. There could be micro differences in the soil and underground water flow, all kinds of things like that that are unaccounted for, but they were definitely bigger and more vigorous
Oh,
on the
were
willow
they?
trees. So
Mm,
at the
wow, that's
very least, it's
interesting.
not harming them. Like, like at the very least, it's not like the idea of that you're out competing, you're going to create all this competition that will reduce the vigor of the vines or prevent the vines from, it that I just think clearly was shown already in the first 5 years of what they're doing there to be, like you don't have to worry about that in this system with their rainfall. I mean, he also said it hadn't stopped raining for 18 months when he visited.
Yeah, it's
So
wild.
yeah, so I mean that's part of why they wanted the willow with the vines to
Yeah,
help soak
yeah.
up some of that moisture and
Great.
dry
It's a
out the
great
soil.
plan, isn't it? But it's
Yeah.
interesting talking about the whole ecosystem because we've been conducting a literature review into the peer-reviewed studies that about regenerative viticulture and the findings from that. It's just been accepted for publication. We're waiting for the final proof before it gets published, but so it is ready and accepted. But some of the findings, we haven't been through them with a fine-tooth comb because I mean it's a huge document,
Yeah.
are that while there are kind of quite a lot of there's quite a lot of evidence to support things like cover crops, no-till, mulches, things like that as being beneficial. There's very little looking at the whole ecosystem because if you think about a scientific trial, most of them are what they call treatment response. So you do a treatment and you have a control where you don't do the treatment and you see what the response is. And that's quite easy, though actually most things are quite difficult with growing conditions because you don't normally have uniformity of vigor amongst the vines. But anyway, putting all that to one side, that's relatively easy to do, but it's really difficult to do a whole, all the different changes. And there's some studies, really interesting studies coming out of UC Davis at the moment where they're looking at combinations of things like no-till and sheep grazing and composting and I'm trying to think of the other, cover crops in different combinations to see what the effect is on the vine health and the soil health and things like that. So, and I think they're starting to do some studies into the economics of it actually. So that would be quite exciting. UC Davis is doing lots of really interesting research. So that's one of the things we've found with the literature review is that this kind of gap or ecosystem thing because it's so difficult to do. And of course, as we talked about earlier, 1 year is not enough, is it? You can't just do 1 year. You have to do really
Yeah.
5 or 6. There's some interesting studies in. Have you come across this German university, Geisenheim? They have a
Sure. Yeah.
researcher there who's been doing. Or this isn't the same researcher who's been doing it, but she's currently responsible for it. 20 years of side by side plots for organic, biodynamic, and conventional. So, not regenerative,
Yeah.
because we weren't even talking about that 20 years ago. But biodynamic, I think, has a lot of overlaps with regen, but actually,
Sure.
just interesting to see 20
And that,
years of data. And what
and
she
that's
was saying,
specifically vines, or is it
yes,
other?
yes,
Okay,
fine.
specifically
Yeah.
vines. Okay.
She spoke at this event around this time last year called Vineyard Biodiversity. It was in South France, and she's called Joanna During. She spoke at this and presented her findings, and what she it was really fascinating because what she was saying was that people talk about lower yields with organic and biodynamic compared to conventional. She didn't call it conventional; she called it integrated, but I think essentially that's the same thing. Um, and she said that after for the first, I don't know, 10 years maybe, there was a drop in yields. I don't know what the actual number of years is, but there was a drop for organic and biodynamic. But interestingly, in the years since climate change has started to really increase temperatures and have a big impact, the biodynamic plots are outperforming the others. And
Yeah.
it was a really interesting talk she gave.
Yeah, I think that's those are what I'm finding as well. I mean, that's even with Kane's study here in Paso Robles. It's because I think he's seeing better productivity on average because they've had challenging years with drought and heat
Mm,
stress and things like that, and variation. So it'll, like 2 years of extreme drought and heat followed by like one historically like I mean like record setting rainfall year, and
yeah,
when you average those variations of extremities, the regenerative systems are faring much better. Like they're much more resilient given these extremities, is what it's really beginning to
yeah.
look like in those pictures. And if our future is extremity, which it seems like it's going to be, like that's
We
good
need
news
that
for
resilience,
regenerative.
don't we?
Yeah,
We need to build
yeah,
that resilience. We do talk a lot about resilience to heat and water, excesses of both at the moment. There's some cool slides with thermal imaging of a ploughed field as opposed to a non-ploughed field, as opposed to a woodland with the temperature in heat spikes. The a Frenchman slides that I keep using, this man slides, yeah, and you see this kind of gets up to 48 degrees centigrade. I've no idea what that is in Fahrenheit. I can only apologise. Very hot, red,
yeah,
very
yeah.
red on the map on the ploughed field, and then kind of bluey grey on the ones that aren't ploughed.
Right.
Yes, yes. So earlier I was talking about our RV guide, and I did want to talk a little bit more about it. We're probably running out of time, aren't we? So,
Well, I mean,
um,
yeah, I mean, I was just, yeah, trying to, I was going to steer you back to anything
oh,
like that, the
cool.
RV guide, all the resources that you guys have, and you are a nonprofit, so ways that, people can support or get involved or whatever
Oh,
is
yes, brilliant.
desired.
Yeah, we are a non-profit and we're supported by philanthropic donations. So, people are very welcome to donate to us if they wish. There is a button on our website. So everything we do is open source. We don't charge for anything because we think that we want everybody to be able to access everything. So we don't have a membership model as such. We have a newsletter that we have about 2,000 people on the database for, and we send out a monthly kind of update and all the wonderful things that have been happening and are going to happen around the world in regenerative viticulture, just sharing events and sharing interesting scientific studies that have come out, things like that. And then this RV guide, this was our big thing. I mentioned it before with its 16 topics, and you said what a lot of them are. So things like monitoring soil health. For each of these topics, we don't just have these resources in our toolkit, we have the same information on the RV guide, and it's essentially a questionnaire for grape growers. They go on, they add a couple of details about their vineyard, not very many, and then they answer questions. And the first question for each topic is about their confidence in their ability to make a change in that topic area. So it could be monitoring soil health, which is the first one, and we think is really important. How confident do they feel in their ability to monitor their soil health? And so we're trying to find out. There are three answers. The bottom one would be, I have no idea, I don't feel confident at all. The middle one would be, I'm fairly confident, but I could maybe do with some pointers. And the top one would be, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm totally confident, don't need any help. So that's allowing us to build a picture of where people feel they need the most help so that we can direct our slightly limited resources towards those areas. And interestingly, well, you wouldn't be surprised, but the ones that come up the most as being where people feel they have the least confidence is about ecosystem design. So essentially designing it from scratch as a whole new ecosystem, which, as
Ah,
we talked about, is exciting but quite complex.
yeah.
Agroforestry, which people, I think, so there's different definitions, and I think some people define agroforestry as including hedgerows, not taking things out, retaining remnant trees, things like that. But we're normally talking about kind of introducing trees, probably,
Hmm.
and making your plots smaller so you don't have such big plots, and having more wildlife corridors, biodiversity corridors. Um, and then the other one, weirdly, is integrating animals in the vineyard, which I thought would be one that people felt relatively confident about. But I think it's mainly because I see quite a lot of pictures of sheep in vineyards on Instagram, and so I've got a slightly skewed view of how many people have got sheep in their vineyard. In fact, I don't think it is quite as many as I think. So it just looks quite nice on Instagram, I think. So that's the first question, which helps us kind of work that bit out. And then the second question is about what their current practices are. So have they started monitoring their soil? The first one is no, I haven't even started monitoring my soil health. The middle question, my answer would be, oh yes, I've started, but I haven't really got much data yet or seen any improvements yet. And then the top question would be, oh, yes, I've been doing it for quite a few years and I've started to see improvements in my soil organic matter, something like that. So, and then at the end of this questionnaire, when they've answered the 16 topics, they can choose to be included on our map of growers, which I mentioned earlier. So then we're starting to build this map, and it's not a certification, it's not a verification. We're not asking anyone for any proof that they're doing anything. It's just so that people who are interested in regenerative practice can kind of be included in our community and start kind of reaching out to each other. So the first people we knew about who met each other was someone from the UK, was on holiday in France, and they went to visit this very tiny producer in France called Paradise Rescued. He would be an interesting person to talk to on your cast.
Oh,
David Stannard. He has this perfect kind of very tiny vineyard, but in a kind of really going for it with regenerative practices, really interesting and very open to sharing his experiences. And this UK grower went over to visit him, and I think his wife got quite fed up because they were still up at kind of 2 o'clock in the morning talking about regenerative practices. So but it was wonderful to hear that the first people had found each other through the map, which I just love. And so this year we really want to build the how many people are on the map, because it's currently, I think we've got 400 users signed up to it, but we've got about 180 vineyards added to it at the moment. Yeah, people don't have to go on the map at all. They can still do the guide. The idea is that they kind of manage to identify what good practices they already have, because lots of people already do have lots of good practices. But then to kind of have a think about how integrated they might be. It kind of probes some questions, and then discover new practices that they might consider with the resources that might help them to do that. That's the idea. So they don't
okay.
have to be on the map at all. Some people aren't ready to do that, but they're not proclaiming that they're the most regenerative viticulture in the world by being on the map. They're just saying that they're interested. And the map can be filtered by, so people can search by different practices, people who are doing different. So that's going to be a big
Yeah.
push for this year, I think.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so regenerativeviticulture.org is a great place to visit for all of this, right? To keep posted, to sign up for the newsletter, which am, I get your newsletter, love hearing from you, and love
Yeah,
all the resources and articles that you connect to from that. It keeps me like informed of so
yeah,
many amazing things that are happening. And then, yeah, events that you're doing, if people can get to those, which again, I can speak to your online sort of symposiums that you do that have been free that I can just attend, sign on to,
yeah,
and
yeah. The
learn
webinars,
about
yeah.
agroforestry. It sounds like
So,
those times.
well, actually, if you've got any ideas for other topics other than agroforestry, we're planning the next few with the Porto Protocol. So
Oh,
trying to
fantastic.
work out where people feel they need the most help. Because what I love these webinars, they're like they feel very much like a community. To come back to where we were talking about community, because I love it when people attend in real time. Obviously, you can watch them back whenever you want, and that's or you can listen to them when you're stuck in traffic or something. But they're best when you listen live, because you can send your questions, they get
Yeah.
answered, and you get a feeling that we're all in this together, that we're all trying to do the right thing together. That's what I love about it.
I, you know, I mean, the thing that jumped in my head was like my suggestion would be, why don't you do something on ecosystem design, since that seems to be where people have a lot of questions, especially the people that are engaging with you. But also, I my next thought was I have a feeling part of that difficulty in people wrapping their heads around ecosystem design is partly because, like you said, it's a whole system it's holistic thinking. It is big, it's a lot to deal with. It's complex. But the other thing is, I think so many people come to viticulture with what they want already very hardened, very like they're very sure about what they
Mhm.
want, like whether specifically grapevines, obviously, but then
Yeah.
specific types of grapes and
Yeah.
things like that are very much already part of what they bring to their land. And so it's, how do you balance that? Like, how do you balance people? Obviously, if you're into viticulture, you're thinking, if you have a
Yeah.
hammer, everything becomes a nail. You're already thinking about that. But how do you get them to look at the land with maybe a more open eye and balance what the land wants versus what they love and want to put on the land? And that
Wow,
could,
that's a really deep question though, isn't it? Because,
yeah, yeah.
Vitis vinifera and its susceptibility to fungal disease.
Well,
Um,
that's what I was getting at. Yes. I
yeah.
mean, guys,
You
you
want a
mentioned
whole peewee.
Geisenheim. The reason I know
Yeah.
Geisenheim, because I think Geisenheim is one of the developers of a lot of the new peewees that have come out, the last
Yeah.
few decades as well. So
Yeah.
they're,
And
and
I mean, it is interesting how some of these varieties, the new kind of hybrids, are kind of being used in certain areas, isn't it? I know you've got a bit of a penchant for the disease-resistant variety. I might
I
test you. What
do.
does Peewee stand for, Adam? Do you know?
Yeah, that's the
Go on, say it.
Pittswilder
Say it out loud.
Pittswilder Standfähige,
Yay,
something
well
like that.
done. Um, sorry. Yeah, so the Scandinavians, they're quite keen on them, aren't they? And I mean, like people like Paul in Wales, he's using hybrids, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah, and
And but
Limeburn Hill.
I'm
Yeah,
intrigued
yeah,
by the kind of some of these very traditional appellations in France starting to allow certain varieties of hybrids to be at very small percentages planted and included in the blend. And I think because it's in Champagne and in Bordeaux, they've both allowed them. And I think it's quite interesting because somebody once said to me, it wasn't that long ago, but they said something like, for most appellations or wine region rules are that if, for example, Chianti is Sangiovese grape, then 85% of the grape has to be Sangiovese, and the other 15% can be anything. I might be
right.
wrong about Chianti, but for
Yeah,
some
we have
reason,
something like 75-25 here
yeah. So
in the
someone
US.
said to
Yeah.
me, "What if all that kind of extra bit that wasn't the variety that's specified was a peewee?
Yeah.
You could
Yep.
massively slash the fungicide spray tonnage
Yep.
by having lots of peewees." But it's a very big conversation, and you're right, not everybody wants to grow peewees, as we're discovering.
Well,
Yeah.
but it is changing. I mean, definitely, I mean, in 2021, the EU laws forbidding, you know, those grapes was lifted,
Mhm.
specifically because of climate change and the change,
Yeah.
the fact that resilience is necessary, and the only way you're going to get that is by starting to breed and select new varieties that, I mean, it just makes sense. Like, it's, yeah, like you can't stay the same forever as the world changes around
No.
you
Or you go
without.
back to the very traditional varieties. You look for
Yeah.
those, like in Portugal, they're doing that a lot with looking because they've got hundreds of
Mm,
indigenous varieties, and they're looking
yeah.
back to those to find the ones that are strongest in climate change,
Yeah.
but have the most resilience. But I don't know if they're doing that with a kind of fungicide lens on it or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, anyway, I was talking about all the resources, and people should go to
I'll,
regenerativeViticulture.org.
I'll stop going off on tangents. Sorry.
No, no, these are great tangents. I mean, that's my problem, is I love all these tangents. Um, Anything else that we forgot to mention about RVF, or resources or ways people should join or participate? Oh, yeah, that's what we were talking about, the next events that you guys might be doing, online
Yeah, so
workshops
we've
or
got
events,
yeah,
panels that you do.
yeah, yeah. We're forever on panels. It feels like so. But we love them. We love all these opportunities to talk about it, and for people to give us really difficult questions as well, because we don't have all the answers. No one has all the answers. We're just trying to share what knowledge we are managing to glean from everyone's experiences around the world. So, and we know that everybody's experience. I don't think there's anything else I want to share, but I know that as soon as I come off this call, I'm going to think, why didn't I say that?
Well, thanks for the work that you're doing. Thank you for coming and talking to me about it and for about all these other things as well. It's really fun and really great what you're doing. And yeah, I hope that people will use this as an opportunity to find out more and to take advantage of so many of these great resources and just move us all in the right direction. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Adam. I mean, we really appreciate your support and the work that you do. It's like the Mutual Appreciation Society. Thank you very much. It's been lovely to be here.
Likewise. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I want to thank all of you who support this podcast through donations, Patreon subscriptions, sponsorships, or just posting a great review and telling a friend. You make this podcast possible, and I'm honored and humbled and inspired by your support. If you'd like to support this podcast, you'll find links to all the ways you can support it in the show notes.